Welcome to another explainer. Today we're doing something a little bit different, and honestly, it's absolutely incredible. We're looking at 10 real people who started with, well, absolutely nothing, zero advantages, and they somehow turned that into literal billions. Now, these aren't movie scripts, right? No fictional overnight success stories here. Stick with me to the end of this because the lessons woven through these real-life stories are going to completely shift how you look at your own potential.
Okay, I want you to really put yourself in their shoes for just a second. Imagine waking up every single day in crushing poverty. I mean, literally sleeping on the floor because your family just can't afford a bed. You got no safety net, no rich uncle swooping in, and definitely no trust fund to fall back on.
Now imagine spending your days scrubbing dirty dishes for minimum wage just to survive. Your hands are cracked, you are bone tired, and the very idea of wealth, man, it feels like it's in a completely different universe. You're literally just trying to make it to tomorrow.
And even worse, imagine putting yourself out there, desperately trying to escape that cycle, and just getting rejected from dozens of basic entry-level jobs. Door after door slammed right in your face, being told no over and over again, until, let's be real, most people would just completely give up.
Okay, let's dive into this. Because how in the world do you go from those brutal realities to sitting on top of a multi-billion-dollar empire? Well, it turns out success doesn't actually depend on where you start. The data and the incredible stories we're going to look at today prove that it depends entirely on what you do next.
Section 1. The Ultimate Underdogs.
Let's look at Howard Schultz. His beginnings were a huge contrast to the empire he had eventually built. He grew up in a really tough Brooklyn neighborhood, living in public housing, watching his dad struggle constantly just to keep a job. That was his everyday reality. But Schultz had this massive turning point, He decided absolutely for sure that he wanted to build a company that treated its employees better than his father had been treated. And that deep emotional drive, it led him to buy Starbucks and blow it up into the colossal global coffee empire we all know today.
Your background doesn't determine your future. That is the massive takeaway from Schultz, and it perfectly bridges us right over to Oprah Winfrey. Oprah was born into severe, crushing poverty in rural Mississippi. The statistical odds of her breaking out of that environment were virtually zero. Yet, she refused to let that background dictate her finish line. She pushed through and completely transformed herself into a media billionaire. She literally willed a totally different future into existence.
Section 2. The Immigrant Hustle.
$500. Seriously, think about how fast you can spend $500 on just basic necessities today. Well, that tiny amount is all Shahid Khan had in his pocket when he arrived in the United States. He worked washing dishes just to scrape by. But he took that incredibly humble foundation and used it to eventually build a massive, wildly successful auto parts empire. Duan Chang faced a similarly brutal reality early on. He took on the most grueling, unglamorous jobs you can imagine, working as a janitor and a gas station attendant. I mean, he was working exhausting, crazy hours just to survive. But he took that relentless work ethic, pivoted, and founded Forever 21, creating an absolute force in global fashion.
Now, what's really interesting here is this staggering number, $19 billion. That belongs to Jan Koum. He immigrated to America from Ukraine with his mom, and they had so little money they literally relied on food stamps just to eat. But Jan, he didn't sit around waiting for a savior. He taught himself programming, created a little app you might have heard of called WhatsApp, and eventually sold it to Facebook for $19 billion. From food stamps to $19 billion. Just wild.
Skills can change your life. That is the core lesson from Koum's journey. Look, when you have absolutely no capital, no fancy network, and no resources, your skills become your absolute highest leverage. He didn't have money to invest, right? So he invested in his own mind. He taught himself to code. Skills absolutely can and will change your life.
Section 3. Rising above circumstance.
And this brilliantly illustrates how early deficits don't have to define you. Take Larry Ellison, raised by relatives, dropped out of college, yet he goes on to found the software giant Oracle. Or Ka-shing, who had to drop out of school at just 15 years old to support his family. He didn't even get to enjoy being a kid. He just had to survive. Yet, he pushed through all of that to become one of Asia's richest entrepreneurs. Then there's Leonardo del Vecchio, who faced arguably the ultimate lack of a safety net. He actually grew up in an orphanage. But he executed this phenomenal pivot from those really tough beginnings to eventually creating Luxottica, which, if you didn't know, is the world's largest eyewear company.
If you take away anything from these incredible guys, it's this: missing out on traditional advantages early on, like a stable family home, a college degree, or even just a normal high school experience. None of that stopped them. They proved that circumstances dictate your starting line, not your finish line.
Section 4. Defying relentless rejection.
Jack Ma's story is absolutely legendary when it comes to failure. He was rejected from dozens of jobs. He even got rejected for a job at KFC. I mean, imagine the blow to your confidence. But instead of letting all those closed doors defeat him, he just kept pushing. Those rejections simply redirected him toward a much larger path, eventually leading him to launch the e-commerce titan, Alibaba.
You can actually see a repeatable pattern here. Look at Ralph Lauren's trajectory. Step 1. Start incredibly small. He just started out selling ties. Nothing glamorous at all. Step 2, just like Jack Ma, is persisting through brutal rejection and market friction, which finally leads to Step 3, building a massive luxury fashion brand. The path from the very bottom to a global empire happens step by step.
Success doesn't depend on where you start. It depends on what you do next. This is the overarching truth here. Being told no, getting rejected by KFC, or starting out by just talking ties out of a drawer, those are just stepping stones. What you actually do the day after you get rejected, that's the only thing that matters.
Section 5. The final blueprint. So the crucial point is that every single billionaire on this list had one major thing in common. Not a single one of them started with money. Instead, they all started with 3 specific things: an idea, relentless persistence through agonizing rejection, and years of grueling hard work. That is the actual formula. I really want you to absorb this reality today. Whether you're washing dishes, feeling totally stuck in a dead-end job, or facing constant rejection right now, your current situation isn't your final destination. The data from these 10 incredible lives proves, without a doubt, that the next major success story could absolutely be yours if you apply their blueprint.
We are so conditioned to believe that wealth is just inherited, but these 10 stories prove that the greatest empires are often forged in the deepest adversity. If the starting line doesn't determine the finish line, the only real question left is, what are you going to do with your next? Which of these stories are you going to channel tomorrow? Let me know in the comments below. And hey, if you enjoy learning through these explainer videos, make sure to subscribe. Every week we share structured breakdowns that can completely change the way you think about success. Thanks for hanging out with me, and I'll see you in the next one.